Hey,
Great to be
Walter,
here
it's
today.
really good to talk to you again.
You too, Jenna.
Yeah, the last time that we spoke to each other, I think, was right before your big conference. So it's good to reconnect and maybe connect some of those dots.
Sure. Yeah, we had our conference back in September. It was a great conference. Had a lot of sales enablement practitioners at the conference. Of course, our Sales Enablement Society members and a lot of our partners who are partners we position as our vendors. But the feedback from the conference overwhelmingly was very strong, a lot of great content at the conference, and we're looking to build off that.
That's great. That's great. It sounds like a big success. I know we've talked a little bit more about that offline.
Right.
And ATD also has our big conference coming up in November, the SEL conference, the one specifically focused on sales enablement, leadership, and learning. So that is in part why we're here today. I think with the confluence of a couple of things getting towards the end of the year here, a lot of people are thinking about 2019, some of the trends that have emerged from the Sales Enablement Society conference, and some of the trends that we're seeing that are kind of leading us into the SEL conference. Walter and I have these conversations about what are the big trends that are shaping our shared community, because we certainly want to make sure we're staying on the same page. And the reason we wanted to record this conversation was so that we could extend that discussion to the larger group and larger community and invite your feedback as well and your thoughts, because really what our goal is to help provide the community with whatever resources we can to ensure that they're successful, especially with this continually evolving function and industry that we're in here. So what we wanted to start by talking about today, and this will be the first of 3 conversations that Walter and I have between now and the end of the year. We really wanted to take a step back and remember that although a lot of these discussions we have are about elevating the sales enablement practice, at the end of the day, it is one that is growing so rapidly. We always have new practitioners coming into the fold who maybe don't have that much sales enablement experience. Maybe when they applied for the job, they had to Google what is enablement. And then we have a lot of folks that are coming into companies where they are building that function for the first time for them. So what we wanted to do was talk about a couple of the considerations that those practitioners should have when they're getting started. So Walter, I will turn it over to you first, just to talk a little bit about your view on some of the challenges associated with getting started and what you're hearing from your members.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So as I like to say, sales enablement is a mile wide and a foot deep. Very broad, right? There's a lot to it. So getting started can be very difficult if you have not been in the role of sales enablement. Also, I think the challenge is a lot of organizations are hiring individuals and thinking, as an example, I see this all the time, well, we're going to hire an individual for sales enablement. It's just training and coaching. It's not the broad spectrum of enablement. So at times, unfortunately, it could have potential to pigeonhole that individual into a specific role. And that can potentially affect growth. I also think the big challenge is where you really need to get executive sponsorship. And to do that, you have to think about sales enablement really from a strategic function within an organization. Because when I look at sales enablement, and we hear this all the time through the Sales Enablement Society, it really needs to be tied to revenue growth. So how can you start with short-term wins where that you can dramatically affect the effectiveness, the efficiency, the productivity of the rep, where they can actually potentially close more deals. So there's many areas you can focus, but if you start from a perspective of, again, if you're looking as example from a short-term win perspective, you could potentially just start with a specific product or service within a given channel of your organization where you're focusing on a specific customer base, and you may assess that the individual reps from what are their skill gaps and needs and be able to focus and drill down. As example, hey, we need to be able to close more deals. We need to have a live whiteboarding session for a number of the reps before they close deals, where they could actually come in that given day into, as example, they could come into Slack and come in and ask for a meeting with one of the sales managers where they could whiteboard this out to help them close the deal. That's just one of many areas, but you do want to very much focus from short-term wins to get long-term results, but they do need to tie to revenue. But even the short-term goals and wins need to be strategic in nature and have a foundational framework in place that you can build off of and scale to get that executive sponsorship and really tie it to revenue growth.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's an interesting point you bring up about the unintentional pigeonholing that sometimes leaders do. So maybe this is good advice to sales leaders as well who are thinking about hiring for the first time in that role, and the way that they structure their onboarding, allowing time for that person to collaboratively identify what the purpose of this role is going to be, and allow that process to happen after that sales enablement manager is hired instead of predetermined.
Right.
We were having a Twitter chat the other day with some of our sales speakers, and my friend Mike Kunkel, who I know is a member of both of our communities,
right,
was answering one of the questions that we had asked about, what do you do when you're building a sales enablement function? And he said the first thing that you should really do is work on creating that charter, getting aligned with the sales leadership, and then defining what sales enablement is going to be in that organization, because it really is different in every company. And maybe it turns out that the most important thing is training and coaching, but we don't want to try to determine that ahead of time before we've mapped it to some of the metrics and outcomes like you were talking about.
Right.
So how do you do that? How do you set a charter and figure out who is going to be involved and how you're going to do it and what the timeline is? You can start with a competency model. ATD has a competency model, and there are other models out there that will show you sort of the full scope of what sales enablement could be. And from there, you can start that conversation with some of the stakeholders and leaders to determine what is most important to us in our organization and how can we prioritize. Because I think, the blessing and the curse of the type of people that get involved in sales enablement is very ambitious, very driven, always sort of an overachiever. And so what we find, in our community is that way more priorities end up getting added to the list than can be accomplished in a given year. And so it's a matter of scaling back from there. And another interesting comment that came up during this same Twitter chat was from actually our keynote speaker, Adam Michaels, who was talking about when you are in the process of getting set, what you're going to accomplish for that year, or if you're new to the role, getting started. Don't forget to talk to some of the individual contributors as well, and some of the frontline managers, because as he says, what you hear on the street might be different than what you hear from the suite. And it's important to balance those two things because sometimes they can be a little bit disconnected. So nothing wrong with, even if you haven't been given this latitude explicitly, proposing, let's put together a sales enablement advisory committee, and let's make sure that the members of that committee have different viewpoints, are conducting different roles, and there's nothing wrong with a little bit of healthy disagreement in that.
Right, I agree.
Yeah. So now, Walter, we've talked in the past about your view on the pillars of sales enablement. Maybe you can expand a little bit on that and how that aligns with or works into what you were talking about earlier about the foundation.
Right. So as we were talking about earlier, you really need, I believe, to be effective at building a sales enablement function within an organization. You really must start with the strategy, the framework, and where are you working to? And again, what this gives you, you can even have a strategy and framework place, even if you're starting with short-term wins just at the beginning stage, or if you're advancing, maturing your sales enablement function within an organization. Within that strategy and framework, there are important pillars you need to consider. So when I look at these different pillars, I want to talk about one, sales enablement coaching and training. So when we look at that pillar, we want to look at it from a perspective of the onboarding process to the everboarding process. And the everboarding process, as I like to term, is the ongoing learning and development, and how you can provide immediate value to those reps when they need to get information quickly, as I like to call just-in-time learning. So you really need to think through that and how you implement that. And what we're seeing today is digital is becoming a strong component to this. And of course, in your onboarding programs, yes, you're going to have to do live sessions, but also how can you ramp those sessions up where you may get the sales rep up to speed quicker to get out into the field to begin selling quicker. So on-demand content, on-demand learning, micro content, digestible content where that rep can quickly get the information they need. So again, that's the onboarding to the everboarding component through the coaching and training. Number two, make sure you have a defined sales process and methodology that you're going to use where you can map out your different stages and your content and your sales messaging and things of that nature. And also you want to think about mapping that sales process to the buyer's journey based upon specific buyers in specific industries. Sales messaging would be another component. There's a lot of challenges today with organizations with sales messaging, and how do you distill down value-based sales messaging that can easily access and get the information the sales rep needs when they have those value-based conversations with the potential customer. Also, the sales content. This is a big challenge now for many organizations. They may have content in many different areas and forms. They could be using Google Docs. They could be using Dropbox. They could be using a variety of different tools. So a lot of times the reps don't even know where the content exists, what the content is, how to access the content. And even if they know where it is, if it's not managed in an effective process and mapped out effectively when they need it at the different stages of the sales cycle, it's very difficult for them to go in and gather that necessary information they need. So you've got to make sure you have a system in play where they can quickly access that information. Also, the technology component to sales enablement, there's some really great tools out there like sales asset management systems, other tools. There are many out there. How you can implement this from another pillar of enablement, but you also have to make sure you have your strategy in place first that aligns with that technology to be most effective for your organization. And lastly, I would say the KPIs, metrics, and other data that you need to measure based upon your goals and objectives and your sales performance indicators to make sure your program is working effectively.
Yeah, I think some great points in there. One thing that I always hear different members of the Sales Enablement Society talking about is that focus at the end of the day on the buyer. Couldn't agree more with that. However, everything we do has to be shaped towards the buyer experience at the end of the day. And so I think that sort of runs under those pillars, supporting them. And I think the other thing that I hear a lot of the time, I was recently at the Sales Enablement Soiree, an event in San Francisco, and what a lot of people were talking about was, okay, let's try to get one step past just being able to generate all of this content, sales messaging, training modules for the onboarding program, and figure out, are they working or not? Because it can get really easy to get caught up in just pumping out tons of material to fill a gap that may exist. And just because it's there, it doesn't mean that salespeople are using it or know how to use it or are using it effectively. So I think it's that hand in hand needing to, yes, there is an urgency with filling some of these gaps where they may not have content for every stage of the buyer journey right now. But once we've put it out there, we definitely have to be measuring it.
Right. Most definitely.
Yeah. So I think what this all comes down to, it sounds like, and there's been threads of this throughout our conversation, is always thinking about, at the end of the day, the ROI, which starts in that alignment process. And it has to do with identifying some of the metrics, some of the ones you mentioned, Walter, like, our reps hitting quota. We've talked about customer churn being another metric that people care about. A lot of our members over at ATD Sales Enablement Community have been focusing on how they can measure high performer retention, because that is something that, speaks directly to what you're saying about not just onboarding, but everboarding. Love that term. People go crazy for onboarding, and we can't forget about the ongoing development of the reps. That really has a big impact on how long we can keep them around and reduce the turnover, at least for the high performing ones. So again, for me, I think about this as something that you really need to sit down with the stakeholders, the senior leadership, identify all of the metrics that they care about, and again, prioritize them and pick a couple to focus on, because it can be really tempting to think of 15 different metrics that you want to all try to impact in the first year, and it's just not going to happen, or it's not going to be as effective as zeroing in on one or two. The good news is, if you see this in your community, Walter, I've certainly seen it in mine, we have more and more people getting into sales enablement that started out in the sales role. They were a quota carrier that got interested in training or coaching or management, and then that's how their path kind of led to sales enablement. I know it's the case with me. So that means that those people already have those skills. They've been talking to buyers, they've been creating business cases, doing discovery, doing diagnosis, and having to tie metrics to specific elements of whatever this proposal is for the new path forward. So it's really interesting how there's this mirroring of what you're doing in sales enablement, so many ties to what you would be doing in sales.
Right. I agree totally. Yeah. And you have to tie it to the metrics and the data. That's key. I mean, again, this goes back to the whole concept of, getting that executive sponsorship, that buy-in overall from the organization. And if you think of sales enablement from a strategic function, the higher up you can move within the organization. I know many sales enablement practitioners that started off maybe reporting to VP of sales, and now they're reporting to the CFOs of the organizations based upon that.
Yeah, it is a big opportunity to prove your mark, or make your mark, and prove yourself. Prove your mark. Maybe I'll start using that. But as a function of being able to start with small wins and really expand that into strategic. Yeah, so speaking of that, just as we have many people coming into the fold, that means that we also have a lot of people in the sales enablement world that have either been at their company, or they've just been in sales enablement for a year or maybe less than a year. So what advice, Walter, would you give people that are at the year mark, maybe thinking about how they can do things a little differently, looking back at what's happened and then continuing forward and trying to do better?
Yeah, so I would say the key element, again, is really having that sound foundation, that sales enablement strategy and framework in place. Now, we talked about short-term wins, so it can be much smaller starting off. But as you're maturing in the function, you've been there a year or so, you may be expanding that sales enablement function. We talked previously about the pillars of enablement. Different areas where you can integrate those pillars of enablement into your sales enablement strategy, where they could be integrated effectively together to provide you more positive outcomes to increase revenue for the organization and get the metrics and data that you're actually looking for to drive growth. That's really key. So integrating those pillars, also making sure that I see sales enablement very much where a lot of success is occurring now within an organization where it's working cross-functionally. So you want to make sure that you're unifying with marketing teams, that you're finding ways to unify with product and service and HR and IT. And of course, if you can move up to the C-suite, even the better. So really that cross-functional discipline where you are able to better align different divisions within the organization to work collectively together. Also, having that an effective sales enablement and communication strategy, I call it, where you're actually, again, having that alignment phase with marketing, other divisions on it could be a weekly, it could be a bi-weekly basis, once a month. You have common goals and objectives you're driving to is really key elements of this. And really what is working and what is look back in the metrics of data, what is working for you and expand on that, and what is not working for you and dissect that, and which do you need to change to work better. Also, I'd say another thing, a lot of companies spend a lot of time focusing, and I understand why, and it is important, that top tier of sales reps. We always talk about that 80-20 rule, right? But I see in organizations, there's a real opportunity to look at that, just that second tier reps. They may be working hard, but they may not have the skills and knowledge yet and the expertise, and they can get there. So if you can implement on your program and have an assessment phase on enablement for individual reps on a quarterly basis, where you can really see that skill gaps and knowledge they need to expand on, it can work really well and in your favor, where you can provide them the training, the coaching, the content, whatever they need to be successful to move to that top tier. So those are just some different areas you can really work towards.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think we shouldn't see it as sort of a new path forward. You know, it's not like you finished your first year and okay, it's time to reset in any way. There should be this constant loop of greater alignment, revisiting the metrics that you're measuring and revisiting the strategic objectives of the business, because those things do change, and it's worth it to over communicate. I think over align, over communicate with your senior leadership to ensure that those objectives are being met. I think after a year, you've probably realized, to my point earlier about maybe how much you've overshot or you know, all the things that you wanted to achieve that you weren't quite able to get to, and have a better sense for what is realistic in your organization for what can get done, and that helps with prioritization. But again, having that constant development and relationship with your senior leadership and different departments. I do think what is different is that in the first year, if you're in sales enablement, you better be a master networker inside your own organization, because you're going to need the help of different departments, and you're going to need those connections to be built, because the first year might be about developing the components that are going to fit within your strategy that you've come up with based on your conversations with maybe your advisory group. But the second year is really your opportunity to build on the relationships that you have with those different departments, what you've been able to do for them and what they can do for you, and to increase the collaboration across the board.
I agree, Tony. That is so important. That whole, as I call it, the sales enablement role, that individuals that are really strong at this almost have that management consulting component in play, where they can really communicate cross-functionally and between different divisions of the organization. That's just going to help drive the function forward to a success for an organization.
Sure, definitely. Yep, and I think the overall, the thing that I would say is really important as you're looking back on year one, heading into year two, this might sound obvious, but really take that opportunity to assemble the right tools around you to be able to conduct a good gap assessment, and talk to people maybe a little bit outside of the circle. You're gonna continuously widen that circle of people that are invested and interested in what sales enablement is doing. So being able to take a hard look at some of the areas that you could still be working on that haven't yet aligned with those metrics that are important to the business. But at the same time, recognizing that, Walter, you and I have talked about this, and I heard this a lot at the Sales Enablement Soiree, people talking about the fact that perfection is the enemy here. So
right.
It's not the end goal is to get your onboarding program into a perfect form. It's to get it to the best you can at that time and continue to evaluate and improve in a cycle, just like agile development. You want to approach it in that way. And so assemble the tools that you need to be able to, like I was saying earlier, measure how well each of the things that you're helping the sales team with is working. And don't be afraid to say no. At one of my previous companies, I used to have these conversations with the founders of the organization, and I was in an enablement role, and I definitely had too much on my plate a lot of the time because I was taking it on. And they always used to say, think about what is your best and highest use at this time. You may really like doing something, you may be really good at something, but if that something can be done by someone else or replaced by technology, then you should be off doing something else where you can have an even greater impact. So that reflection and analysis along the way will help you determine what is your best and highest use within the department, or maybe as the solo sales enablement person within that company.
Right. I agree.
So, okay, so we've been talking for a little while now. I don't want to take up too much people's time as they're starting their mornings here. So what is one takeaway you want to leave people with from this discussion that we can hope that they comment on or get involved with or contribute their own ideas towards? One recommendation that you have for people that are getting started?
I would really say, again, think about work, as I like to use the term, work your way backwards. Really think about the end state, your end goal, what you're trying to achieve. And again, start small. Again, you may be working in a specific area where you're trying to generate revenue growth, make the sales reps more productive and efficient. You may be in a large organization, and there are only maybe 20 to 30 reps that fall within a specific category or product offering. And if your organization is really looking to grow in that area, focus specifically in that area and work your way backwards and focus on the customer. Make sure you're which most organizations are now, but be really focused from the buyer perspective, their needs, be customer centric, and work your way backwards to be able to focus on that product or service that often you want to focus on, and begin then where the skill gaps and needs that you need to enhance for those reps. In other words, you can make them more productive, and then start building out that framework foundationally. It doesn't have to be big starting out, but where can you get small wins based upon that? That's really key.
Very good. Love that. And I suppose my tip for everyone would be coming back to something that I said earlier as well, which is leverage your individual contributors. So if you want to get them involved in the feedback process, include them in some sort of advisory committee, have conversations with at least the ones that you think would not just be focused on what would be good for them, but what would be good for the business. Include their perspectives. And if you're already doing that, maybe there's more that you could include them in. If they devote a little bit of time towards coaching a peer or volunteering to help out on writing a piece of content or writing a training module, that's professional development for them, and that could help them stay engaged with their work and give them another insight that would help them continue to sell better too.
Great point.
So, okay, so that's great. Loved our discussion today, Walter. Really looking forward to the next one, which will come back together sometime in November. That'll be after the ATD Cell conference. So I'm sure I'll have some things to report back from that. Really exciting. That's at the beginning of November. So we should talk about technology next time. I know that you touched on that something today, a little bit today, but so important to be thinking about how you can leverage sales enablement technologies. And there are a lot of options out there.
Right. And they're dramatically changing on a monthly basis. There are more and more coming down the pike.
Absolutely. And you know, you and I were also talking earlier about ensuring that your strategy is sound underneath the technology before you go ahead and implement. So
right, very important.
To it.
Yeah, start with that strategy to align with the technology is going to be a lot more effective for you.
All right, so tune in next time and we'll continue this conversation. But in the meantime, we'd really love to hear from you, the community members out there. So comment or send us some messages about if you agree or disagree or have other recommendations that you'd give to people who are getting started out. And we look forward to broadening this discussion. Thanks,
Thank you,
Walter.
Jenna. Thank you.
Talk to you next time.